G'day, it's Mark and welcome back to the channel, and in this episode we look at the Valiant VF. The VF Valiant was produced from March 1969 to February 1970 and it was built at Tonsley Park in South Australia. Available body styles were the 4-door sedan, a 2-door hardtop, a 5-door station wagon and a 2-door utility. There was also a new luxury VIP model. Engine choices consisted of a 145 brake horsepower, 225 cubic inch, 3.7 litre slant 6, a 160 brake horsepower, 225 cubic inch, 3.7 high performance slant 6, a 175 brake horsepower, 225 cubic inch, 3.7 litre high compression slant 6, a 210 horsepower, 5.2 litre 318 cubic inch V8, which replaced the 273, and a 230 horsepower 318 5.2 Fireball V8. The high compression 6 was fitted to the Pacer and was not available in other models, and the Fireball V8 was standard on the Regal 770 models. Depending on the model, transmissions consisted of a 3-speed manual or a 3-speed torque-flight automatic. Dimensions for the standard sedan were length 192.3 inches or 4,885 millimetres, width 69.7 inches or 1,770 millimetres, wheelbase 108 inches or 2,743 millimetres for the sedan, or 111 inches or 2,819 millimetres for the hardtop. Height for the sedan was 55 inches or 1,397 millimetres, and curb weight for the standard sedan was 2,950 pounds or 1,338 kilograms. The VF Valiant was a facelifted version of the VE Valiant, and it featured 4 new quarter panels, new lights and new grille. The parking and the turn signal lights were now mounted above the headlights. Seating, safety features and soundproofing were also improved. There was also the release of a new Pacer model and the Regal 770 models, and a brand new hardtop body style was offered for the first time. The hardtop combined the VF Valiant front from the A-pillar forward with the rear of the US Dodge Dart. This included the Dodge Dart floor pan and its 111-inch wheelbase. The utilities retained the rear styling of the previous VE series Valiant, and only the front styling was revised. The model codes for the VF Valiant were the Valiant Sedan, which was VF M41, the Valiant Hardtop, VF M23, the Valiant Safari Wagon, VF M45, the Valiant Pacer Sedan, VF S41, the Valiant Regal Sedan, VF H41, the Valiant Regal Hardtop, VF H23, the Valiant Regal Safari Wagon, VF H45, the Regal 770 sedan was VF H41, and that was shared with the Regal sedan. There was also the Valiant Regal 770 hardtop, which was VF H23, and that was also shared with the Regal. The Valiant utility had a model code of VF L20, and the Valiant Wayfarer utility had a model code of VF M20. The hardtop models were introduced in September 1969. And there were also 20 Pacer station wagons built. I've never actually seen one of those. And these have a model code of VF S45. That would be exceptionally rare. As was previous practice, there was also a Dodge utility available, and that was a heavy-duty variant of the Valiant Ute. And it was marketed under the Dodge name with model code VF E20. Big news was also the release of the VF VIP. In May 1969, Chrysler Australia released the new VF VIP, which was VF P41 model code. The VIP now had a 112-inch or 2,850mm wheelbase, which was 4 inches longer than that of the Valiant sedan. And the VIP was visually differentiated with 4 headlights, a new grille, unique taillights, and a limousine-style rear window. The car was badged and marketed as the VIP by Chrysler. A VIP station wagon was no longer available. There's no doubt that the VE Valiant made a big impact on the local market and certainly took it to the local Ford and Holden product. But by 1969, with the release of the VF Valiant, Australians were getting more used to higher spec and higher standard of Australian local manufacturing, particularly up against the XT Falcon and also the HK Holden range. So it was no doubt that expectations were high when people were looking forward to see what the release of the new VF Valiant was like. The new marketing campaign described the VF as the beautiful beast. But the only beast in the VF's 1969 release was the acute shortage of development funds that was generated by the US parent company's woes overseas, particularly in the United States. And as I said, this was at a time when the Ford and Holden product really had stepped up quite markedly in terms of its performance as well. So that really forced the local Chrysler design team to really become very innovative in terms of what they could do with the new VF model on a very tight budget. Despite the lack of funding, it could be argued, though, that the Chrysler US division had many of the components in the local parts bin that could have helped Chrysler provide a more competitive vehicle during the VF launch. The one thing that was really standing out, particularly given the Falcon GT and the Monaro releases, was the fact there was a lack of a real performance hero V8 model in the Valiant range. It is true that the new 318 V8 option appeared to be bigger and more powerful than its 5-litre rivals, but even Chrysler admitted that the outputs were quite conservative for long life and smoother driving. In 1969, there were only 3 local candidates that could live up to the description of beautiful beast when you think about it. And they were things like the XW Falcon GTE or GTHO, the ZC Fairlane 351s, the HT Monaro GTS 350s. So a VF Regal SE 340 or Pacer RT 340 would have been more competitive in that muscle car market that was starting to boom in Australia and in North America as well. In the US, in 1967, Chrysler had differentiated its Dodge and Plymouth versions of the Valiant by boosting the Dodge Dart wheelbase to the same 111 inches that was competitive with the Ford Falcon. And the Plymouth Valiant was smaller with its 108-inch wheelbase. That was closer to what Holden originally intended to do with its HK series before it hurriedly reworked the HK program in response to what they knew was coming with the Falcon XR. By not picking up the longer wheelbase from the Dodge Dart as their standard packaging, which would have been more competitive with the Falcon and also the Holden, it also meant that the Valiant ended up with longer overhangs, which was not ideal for rural buyers who had to contend with spoon drains and similar approach and departure angle challenges. Despite these challenges, though, the VF Valiant must be ranked as one of the best-looking Valiants ever made by Chrysler Australia. It's pretty amazing when you think about it. Chrysler, from where they'd started with the R Series with just one model, they now had multiple models and actually introduced 3 wheelbases with the VF series. So they had the 108-inch wheelbase for the sedan and the wagon. They had the hardtop with the 111-inch wheelbase. Then they had the 112-inch wheelbase with the VIP. Interesting when you look at the VE Valiant grille and a VF Valiant grille, it's almost like a reversal of the treatment. The VE grille sort of cuts into the center of the body, and the VF protrudes outside of that with quite a dark center line in the grille, which is not dissimilar to a 66 Ford Galaxy. The VF also featured slots that were punched in the tops of the front mudguards so that the indicators could sit above the headlights. So this allowed for a slimmer bumper bar, but it also made the front end look quite different and more modern than the previous VE model, and certainly something that was achieved on a very tight budget. Also of interest was the fact that the front bumper bar was the same as the rear bumper bar. So again, recycling the ideas to just try and get the maximum efficiency out of the tooling investment that Chrysler Australia had made. And interestingly enough, talking about saving money, the budget was so tight that the same bumper bar was actually then used to fit the 1976 CL Chrysler facelift. It's fair to say, though, that the VF Safari wagons did really suffer from that shorter wheelbase with shallow load areas and also long rear overhang. And again, as I mentioned before, that was a negative when it came to regional markets where you had spoon drains and, generally quite steep, even in suburban Australia, particularly around Sydney, quite steep driveways. So, approach and departure angles were a bit of a challenge for those, which is why, when you think back to the XK Falcon station wagon, why Ford Australia opted to have a shorter rear overhang than the US wagon in the first model Falcon. So that was a bit of an issue for the Valiant Safari. On a positive note, though, Regal Safari wagons were exported to the UK, and they found a market with funeral directors because the rear section was ideal for carrying coffins. And also the rear sections were exported to South Africa, where it was mated up to the latest US Valiant front to offer quite a unique wagon. That's after the Valiant wagon was dropped in America. Despite the update, though, Chrysler did have some challenges when up against the Falcon and also the Holden. The XW Falcon had that Mustang proportions with the long bonnet, short rear deck, and then you had the HD Holden with its rounded sides, flared wheel arches, flush rear quarters, and again was quite a modern package compared to the VF, which was starting to date a little bit at that point. In 1969, around that era, things were changing quite rapidly in the style stakes, and I think Chrysler's challenges from a budget point of view and what they're able to invest into tooling was starting to really impact them. I guess to sort of highlight that issue, if you think about it, the VF Valiant, if you look at it compared to a Falcon and a Holden, the VF Valiant was the longest car by 8 inches, which is a lot, but it actually had a 3-inch shorter wheelbase. So all of that is in overhang, front and rear. And also it had a smaller or narrower track compared to the Falcon, for example. So, there were some challenges afoot with Chrysler in this space. On the positive, although probably no great advantage over the rival competition, the VF had a new padded steering wheel, collapsible steering column, also had extra padding on the dash, power windscreen washers, had wider 5-inch wheels and padded sun visors. Certainly a big highlight were the 6-cylinder engines. They were certainly class leading in terms of their power output. And they were excellent performers, able to really, meet any requirement from the average family. Chrysler also offered its air temp air conditioning, and it was Australia's first factory air conditioning option. A real highlight from a styling point of view, though, was the VF hardtops. And as I mentioned, they used the imported Dodge Dart panels from the windscreen back, and it gave the car a very upmarket, very swoopy style, almost like a smaller Dodge Phoenix. And, with the 770, Regal 770, and either the 6-cylinder, but also, the 318 V8, it was really a very nice package. A highly desirable car, but one that was probably overlooked by many, was the Regal 770. And that was almost like an early version of a Fairmont Gear or a GXL or a Regal SE. Chrysler offered that car, and when you think about the VE VIP, that was the same wheelbase as the other Valiants in the range. But this Regal 770 was almost like having a VIP but with a shorter wheelbase, and then you could get the longer wheelbase, I guess let's call it the official VF VIP. The Regal 770 had an exclusive Fireball version of the 318 V8, and it was available only for this model and the top of the line VIP. That delivered an extra 20 horsepower or 15 kilowatts. And a similar increase in torque over the normal 318 option. They raised the compression ratio, gave the heads bigger ports, and also had a revised camshaft. It's a shame in a way that they didn't use that Fireball 318 V8 option as a V8 package for like a pacer. I think that would have been really cool to have a competitor to sort of a Falcon GS or maybe not even a GT level performance, but something a little bit more overt in the performance stakes. Another missed opportunity probably in the VF was the fact that there was no two-door hardtop version of the Pacer as well. I think that was remedied in later models, but that also would have been a good opportunity, again with that Fireball 318 V8. I think if they had been a little bit more aggressive, I think that's probably part of the issue. From a marketing point of view, Chrysler were quite conservative. And maybe, I'm not sure whether that's because, coming out of South Australia, I don't know. But, Ford Motor Company were, very aggressive with Bill Burke. Holden was certainly pushing the performance barrow as well. And obviously, Chrysler had the Pacer, but there's probably more they could have done with some, I guess, more clever packaging of their V8 engine and, again, having a performance version of that two-door body style. The VIP was certainly a big improvement over the previous VE model. It certainly looked the part, great looking car. But when you also stop and think about it, it did have a big boost in wheelbase compared to the standard Valiant. But that extra wheelbase was only an inch longer than a Kingswood or a Falcon wheelbase. But as I say, a very nice looking car, the VIP. I certainly would like to have one of those these days. It came out in May 1969. It had that very nice smaller back window, the 4 headlights, the revised grille, the V8 engine, the bucket seats, the floor-mounted torque flight automatic transmission. It was a very nice package indeed. Chrysler was also the first at that point in the local manufacturers to actually tailor the rear doors and the roof to match the extra wheelbase. And that didn't really happen again until 1973 with the release of the P5 Ford LTD, my favourite Australian car. The VIP's padded vinyl roof, which was another first for local manufacturers, gave the car a very almost limousine-like look, particularly with that smaller back window. There's also unique rear taillights in terms of the chrome finishes on those. And unlike the HT Brougham, which had a similar wheelbase, the VF VIP looked very well balanced and it didn't just look like a stretch. And certainly I think the sales results, the VIP actually did quite well compared to the Brougham. Certainly nothing like the Fairlane though in sales, but it was a relatively successful model. It's also worth mentioning though that the VIP was still about 4 inches shorter in wheelbase than a ZC Fairlane, and that's also part of the challenge that I guess the VIP had, and certainly the Brougham had when coming up against the Fairlane, which was dominating that market. You could even argue that maybe the VIP extra wheelbase should have just been the standard wheelbase for all of the Valiants in the VF range, because that would have then been more closely aligned to the wheelbase of the Falcon and also the Kingswood. The VF Pacer was certainly an outstanding package, and I guess it took probably some inspiration from the Plymouth Roadrunner, where you had that very bare basics sort of car as a performance vehicle. Obviously, the Roadrunner had a V8, and Chrysler sort of took quite a different path, I guess knowing that the 6-cylinder engine was quite powerful. But for not much more money than a base Valiant, you could have a VF Pacer, and it really was an outstanding package. The colours available were limited. There was wild blue, wild red, and wild yellow. They're all pretty wild. The blue is also known as cosmic blue, and the yellow is iris yellow. There were also white VF Pacers, and several late examples came in VG's light blue, which was Varshi blue, play on words with colour names, which was also something that Ford and Holden engaged in. Blackouts ratted around the base VF shell. The grille looked its best on the Pacer, with the upper and lower blackouts divided by two fine red bars. Again, similar to some of that highlighting that you'd see on some of the American Chrysler 300 type cars. Local Adelaide company, Adelaide Display Company, which was called Display Masters, they developed a detailed stripe and decal package. There's also a square exhaust tip, which highlighted the sporty nature of the car. The full-width wheel covers were also made in Australia and unique to Chrysler Australia. Cars also had tombstone-style front seats, a dash-top tacho, and floor shift. And it was a good package, I think, for a budget-conscious person who wanted a performance car, but also maybe had requirements to tote a family around. There were no local 4-speed manuals available, so Chrysler fitted a Borg-Warner all-synchro 3-speed manual gearbox. One of the downsides, though, was that reverse occupied the first gear slot that was normally in that same position for a 4-speed, and there was no lockout. So you can imagine there were a few grinding gears as a result of that. There's also an aftermarket VDO panoramic tacho, and that was moved. It was originally going to be ahead of the windscreen, again, similar to some of the US cars, Chryslers, but also things like Pontiacs. And it was mounted atop of the dashboard. And then also an Adelaide seat supplier provided the designs and production for special Pacer tombstone seats. And that was designed to minimise whiplash. It was well ahead of the legislation that was required. The cars just had basic rubber floor mats. They had drum brakes, no heater or radio. Kept the price down to $2,798. Obviously things like carpeting and, the heater and radio were options. It did sell pretty well. The Pacer, I think there was 4,012 sedans plus 20 wagons. I've never seen a Pacer wagon. That would be very cool to see one of those. If any of the subscribers either have one or have seen one, I'd love to hear about it, what colour it was and where you saw it. Funnily, if you look at some of the early advertising for the Pacer, you can actually see the tacho mounted ahead of the windscreen. So that's pretty interesting as to where it was originally going to be positioned. The car had a wider track and also lower ride height, and it made a real big difference to how the car looked, but also how it actually handled as well. The Pacer had a slant 6, which is a high compression version of the twin throat 160 brake horsepower engine, which had a compression ratio 9.2 to 1 from 8.4 to 1, with twin branch exhaust headers that fed into a free flow exhaust system. So that gave it an extra 15 horsepower for a total of 175 horsepower or 131 kilowatts. And as I mentioned, lower ride height, so it was about, 13 mils or half an inch lower in ride height, had heavy-duty front sway bars, 5.5-inch wheel rims, and front and rear track, which was increased by a full inch. And it tightened up the handling and also made the car look a lot better. The tyres were red lines. Don't you love red line tyres? Wish they'd bring those back. They were cross plies, similar to what was on the early Monaros. Pace had a top speed of 107 miles an hour or 171 kilometres per hour. Standing quarter mile was done in 17.8 seconds, which was actually slower than a Regal 770 with the Fireball V8, but, maybe again there was an opportunity there for an optional V8 version. I guess Chrysler was probably thinking, well, if they have their Pacer V8, it'll be outclassed by a GT or a 351 Fairmont. So they probably thought, well, there's no point doing that. So they probably thought, well, let's offer a 6-cylinder performance car that no one else has really got in the market. Disc brakes, highly recommended, were front disc brakes were a $55 option. I think if I was going to buy a car back then from Chrysler, it would have been a either a VIP or maybe the VF Regal 770, first factory aircon. You had nice bucket seats with the buffalo hide trim, not real buffalo, of course. Center console with the floor T-bar, or not T-bar, but the floor shift automatic, radio, disc brakes on the front. It'd be a really nice package with that Fireball V8. The VF was quite successful. Early sales, they were higher. Their monthly sales rate was higher than the VE. But once the rival cars started coming out in 1969, you had things like the XW Falcon, then the sales did start to drop away. And as a result of that, the VF model run was cut short. It was only 11 months in duration. A total of 52,933 VF Valiants were produced, and that includes 3,721 VIPs. Well, I hope you enjoyed that episode on the Valiant VF. If you haven't already, make sure you check out the playlist, which includes all the episodes from the R series right through to the current VF. And we'll be covering all the Valiants right up to the final model. Plus, there's also playlists on the Ford Falcon, the Holden Commodore, the Ford Fairlane. There's also a playlist on old car TV commercials, which you might like as well. Please don't forget to give the episode a thumbs up, hit that subscribe button. It does make a difference. It means that YouTube puts the channel and the episodes in front of other enthusiasts, so it becomes more popular, and so that makes a big difference. So I really appreciate if you take a couple of seconds to do those two things. So thanks again for watching. We'll see you next time. Bye.